Daniel Winslow had never believed in fate. His life was built on strategy, power, and control. Nothing happened by accident. But as he knelt in a hospital hallway, staring into the tear-filled blue eyes of a little boy who clung to his hand, he felt his world tilt. The boy had called him Daddy. And the moment Daniel looked up and saw the familiar face of the woman rushing toward them, panic in her eyes, he knew. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was the past coming back to claim him. Daniel Winslow had never been comfortable in hospitals. The bright white lights, the sterile smell of disinfectant, the constant hum of machines, it all felt suffocating. He thrived in high-rise offices, in the middle of negotiations where every word carried weight, where he dictated the terms and controlled the outcome. Here, in these cold, narrow hallways, there was no control. There was only waiting, uncertainty, and the ever-present reminder of human vulnerability. He wasn't here by choice. One of his company's most important investors had recently undergone surgery, and as a sign of respect, Daniel had made a brief visit. It was a calculated move, a small effort to maintain good relationships. He had done what was expected, spent the required amount of time nodding politely and exchanging pleasantries, and now he was ready to leave. As he walked toward the exit, his mind was already shifting back to work. His assistant had scheduled a conference call in 30 minutes. He had emails to review, reports to analyze, a deal waiting for his approval. He had no time for distractions. Then he heard it. A soft, hiccuping sob. It wasn't loud, barely noticeable over the steady beeping of heart monitors and the distant murmur of voices. But something about it made him pause. He wasn't the kind of man who paid attention to strangers, who stopped to investigate things that weren't his concern. And yet, against his better judgment, he turned his head. Sitting alone on a bench near the pediatric ward was a small boy. He couldn't have been older than 4, his blonde hair slightly tousled, his tiny hands wiping at his tear-streaked cheeks. His blue eyes, too big for his face, were filled with distress as he looked around helplessly, as if searching for someone who wasn't there. Daniel frowned. There were doctors and nurses moving about, but no one seemed to notice the child. He glanced around, expecting to see a frantic parent hurrying back to claim him. But no one came. Something twisted in his chest. He had never been particularly good with children. He didn't dislike them, he just didn't know what to do around them. But something about the boy's expression, so lost, so afraid, made it impossible to walk away. Taking a breath, Daniel approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Are you okay?" The boy sniffled, rubbing at his nose with the back of his hand. His lip trembled as he looked up, as if debating whether he should answer. I lost my mommy," the boy finally whispered, his voice barely audible. Daniel exhaled slowly. He should call for a nurse. He should find someone more suited to handle this situation. But the boy was looking at him now, his blue eyes wide, searching his face as if he expected Daniel to fix everything. Kneeling down, Daniel softened his tone. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, then mumbled, "Olivier." Daniel felt something shift in his chest. He didn't know why, but the name sent a strange ripple through him. "Well, Olivier," he said, keeping his voice steady, "how about we find your mom together?" The boy sniffled again and nodded. Without hesitation, he reached out and grabbed Daniel's hand. Daniel barely had time to process it before Olivier squeezed his fingers, holding on tightly. His small hand was warm, trusting, as if Daniel was someone safe. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't let go. He stood up, scanning the hallway, looking for any sign of someone searching for the boy. A doctor walked past, glancing at them briefly before continuing on. Then, before Daniel could take a step, a voice rang out from around the corner. "Olivier." The sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Daniel turned his head. And everything inside him froze. A woman rushed toward them, her dark brown hair pulled back, her blue eyes filled with panic. She was wearing a nurse's uniform, her hospital badge swinging slightly as she moved. The moment their eyes met, her expression changed. Shock. Recognition. Disbelief. Daniel felt his entire body tense as his mind scrambled to catch up. He knew her. It had been 5 years since he had last seen Sarah Morgan. 5 years since they had spent one unforgettable night together. And now, standing before him, breathless with worry, was the woman who had disappeared from his life without a trace. And in his hand, still clinging to him as if he belonged there, was the little boy who looked exactly like him. Sarah Morgan came to an abrupt stop, her breath catching in her throat as she locked eyes with Daniel. Her heart pounded, her mind racing to process what was happening. She had imagined this moment before, countless times. What she would say if she ever ran into him again. How she would explain the decision she had made. But she had never expected it to happen like this. Her gaze dropped to Olivier, who was still holding Daniel's hand. His small fingers were wrapped tightly around the much larger ones, as if he had already decided that Daniel was someone safe. The sight of them together made her stomach twist. Daniel finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual, but no less intense. Sarah. Her throat felt tight. Daniel. He glanced down at Olivier, then back at her. His expression was unreadable, but his body was tense, his jaw clenched as if he were holding back 100 questions. Sarah forced herself to take a step forward, reaching out for her son. Olivier, sweetheart, are you okay? Olivier turned his big blue eyes up to her and nodded. I couldn't find you. She brushed his blonde hair back gently, trying to steady herself. I was looking for you too, baby. You scared me. Daniel's voice cut through the moment, sharp but controlled. He was sitting alone in the hallway. Crying. Sarah exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of his words. I had to step away for a second to speak with a doctor. I told him to wait right outside the office, but when I came back, he was gone. Daniel studied her for a long moment, then looked down at Olivier again. His gaze softened just slightly. He was scared. Sarah swallowed hard, guilt washing over her. I know. There was silence. The kind that felt too heavy, too charged with things left unsaid. Then Daniel straightened, his eyes locked onto hers. He's mine, isn't he? Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. She knew this moment would come. She had known it from the second she saw the way Daniel looked at Olivier, the way recognition flickered in his expression. But hearing the words out loud made everything real. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, but there was no use in lying. She had kept this secret for too long already. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel inhaled sharply, his eyes darkening with something she couldn't quite decipher. Shock. Anger. Something else. He turned away for a moment, running a hand through his blonde hair. And you didn't think to tell me? Sarah's grip on Olivier tightened instinctively. It's not that simple, Daniel. His head snapped back toward her. It's exactly that simple. You should have told me. Sarah knew he was right. She had spent years justifying her decision, convincing herself that she had done what was best. But standing here now, looking into the eyes of the man she had once cared about, she could see the hurt behind his frustration. She forced herself to keep her voice steady. I tried. Daniel let out a humorless laugh. Really? Because I don't remember getting a call, a letter, anything. I found out I was pregnant after you had already moved on to another city, she said. I didn't know how to reach you. And when I finally did, I convinced myself that it was better this way. His brows furrowed. Better for who? Sarah flinched at the accusation in his tone. I thought you wouldn't want this, she admitted, her voice softer now. You were so focused on your career. You never talked about wanting a family. You had your whole life planned out, and I didn't think a baby fit into that plan. Daniel's jaw tightened. You didn't give me the chance to decide. Sarah looked away. I know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Olivier yawned, rubbing at his eyes sleepily, oblivious to the storm brewing between the two adults. Sarah took a steadying breath and forced herself to focus. This wasn't about her and Daniel. It was about their son. She looked up at him again, her expression guarded. I know this is a lot. I didn't plan for you to find out like this. But now that you know, what are you going to do? Daniel didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at Olivier, as if he were seeing the last 5 years of his life flash before his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but there was no hesitation. I'm not walking away. Daniel had never been the kind of man who let emotions dictate his actions. He built his success on logic, control, and calculated decisions. But standing here, staring at the child he never knew existed, his mind was anything but clear. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath felt shallow, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. Olivier was his son. The truth was undeniable. It was written all over the boy's face, the blonde hair, the striking blue eyes, the shape of his jaw. He looked so much like Daniel that it was a miracle no one had told him sooner. But no one had. Sarah hadn't. Daniel forced himself to breathe, to push down the anger rising in his chest. Getting angry wouldn't change the past. It wouldn't give him back the years he had lost. He needed to focus on the present, on what came next. Sarah shifted beside him, holding Olivier close as if she were afraid Daniel might take him away. He didn't miss the guarded look in her eyes, the way she braced herself as if she was preparing for a fight. He wasn't sure what she expected him to do. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. I want to know him. Sarah exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding her breath. Daniel, this isn't something you can just decide overnight. He met her gaze, unflinching. I didn't have a choice before. I do now. Sarah hesitated, glancing down at Olivier, who was now resting his head against her shoulder, his small fingers curled into her uniform. His eyes were drooping, exhaustion finally catching up to him. The weight of the moment was lost on him, but it was pressing down on both of them. I need to put him down for a nap, she said quietly. We can talk after. Daniel nodded, following her as she led them down the hall. He wasn't sure why he followed. Maybe he just wasn't ready to walk away, not yet. Maybe he was afraid that if he let them out of his sight, the reality of this moment would slip away, and he would wake up to find out it wasn't real. Sarah pushed open the door to a small pediatric recovery room, gently lowering Olivier onto the bed. He murmured something sleepily, reaching for the stuffed animal at his side before settling into the pillow. She ran her fingers through his hair, whispering softly to him until his breathing slowed, and his tiny body relaxed into sleep. Daniel stood near the doorway, watching. He had missed so much. He had missed Olivier's first steps, his first words, the sound of his laughter. He had missed birthdays, bedtime stories, scraped knees, and whispered goodnights. And now, watching Sarah care for their son with practiced ease, he felt the loss settle into his chest like a weight too heavy to bear. When she finally turned back to him, her expression was unreadable. She gestured for him to step outside, quietly pulling the door closed behind them. They stood in the hallway, the space between them thick with unspoken words. Sarah crossed her arms, her posture defensive. What exactly do you want, Daniel? He didn't hesitate. I want to be in his life. She let out a quiet, humorless laugh. And what does that mean to you? Weekly visits? Sending a check every month? What? His jaw tightened. I don't know yet. But I'm not going to disappear. Sarah studied him, searching for something in his expression. He doesn't know about you. Not really. I never told him you left or that you didn't want him. I told him his dad was far away, and that was it. Daniel clenched his fists at his sides. I didn't leave, Sarah. You never gave me the chance to stay. She flinched, guilt flashing across her face. I know. Her voice was quieter now. I thought I was doing what was best for him. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. And now? Sarah hesitated. Now, I don't know. He's never had a father. I don't know how to explain this to him, how to make him understand that you weren't there because you didn't know. Daniel's chest tightened. Then let's figure it out together. She looked up at him, surprise flickering across her face. For the first time since she had run into him, she didn't look like she was bracing for the worst. And for the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't thinking about work, about profits, about the future he had meticulously built for himself. For the first time, he was thinking about them. Sarah didn't respond right away. She stood there, arms crossed, staring at him as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. Daniel didn't blame her. He wasn't sure she should believe him. He had never been a father before. He didn't know what it meant to have a child rely on him, to have someone look up to him the way Olivier already had in the short time they had spent together. But he knew one thing for certain, he wasn't going to walk away from his son. Sarah finally let out a slow breath, her posture relaxing slightly. Okay, she said, though there was still hesitation in her voice. Let's figure it out. Daniel nodded, relieved that she wasn't shutting him out completely. But there was still so much to address, so many unanswered questions hanging between them. He glanced at the closed door to Olivier's room, lowering his voice slightly. What does he know about me? Sarah shifted uncomfortably, as if she had been dreading that question. Not much, she admitted. I told him his dad was far away. That was all he ever asked. Daniel frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. So he never asked why I wasn't around? Sarah hesitated before shaking her head. Not really. He's still young. He doesn't question things the way older kids do. He just accepted it. Daniel swallowed hard. The idea that his own son had never wondered about him, never asked for him, should have been a relief. But instead, it left a hollow ache in his chest. He had been absent for his entire life, and Olivier hadn't even noticed. Sarah must have sensed what he was thinking because her voice softened. It's not because he didn't want to know you, Daniel. He just didn't have a reason to think you'd ever be there. Daniel exhaled slowly, nodding. And now? She looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. Now you're here. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything left unsaid. Finally, Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to just introduce you into his life without confusing him. Daniel squared his shoulders. Then let's take it slow. I don't want to rush him. I just want to be around. Sarah studied him carefully, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. She had spent years raising Olivier alone, making every decision for him, protecting him from anything that might hurt him. Letting Daniel in, trusting that he meant what he said, was a risk. After a moment, she nodded. All right. But we do this my way. On my terms. Daniel lifted an eyebrow. And what exactly does that mean? It means no sudden changes, she said firmly. No big promises you might not be able to keep. No overwhelming him with something he doesn't understand yet. Daniel nodded, though the idea of slow progress made his stomach tighten. He had already lost so much time. But he had no choice. This wasn't a business deal. He couldn't negotiate his way into being a father. What's the first step? He asked. Sarah sighed. Spend time with him. Let him get used to you. But don't push it. He has to come to you on his own. Daniel exhaled. That was something he could do. At that moment, the door to Olivier's room creaked open, and the little boy peeked out, rubbing his sleepy eyes. His blonde hair was a mess, and his voice was groggy when he spoke. "Mommy?" Sarah turned immediately, crouching down to his level. "I'm right here, sweetheart." Olivier's gaze shifted, landing on Daniel. For a second, there was nothing but quiet curiosity in his expression. Then, to Daniel's surprise, he took a few hesitant steps forward and reached for his hand. Daniel froze, barely breathing as Olivier's small fingers wrapped around his. Sarah watched silently, her lips parting slightly in surprise. Olivier looked up at him with the same trusting blue eyes that had stopped Daniel in his tracks the first time he saw him. "Are you staying?" Daniel felt his throat tighten, the weight of the question hitting him harder than he expected. He tightened his grip just slightly, looking down at his son, and spoke with more certainty than he had ever felt in his life. "Yes. I'm staying." Daniel had never thought about what it meant to be needed by someone. In business, people relied on him for leadership, for decisions, for the weight of his name behind deals that shaped industries. But that wasn't the same as this. This was something entirely different. This was a 4-year-old boy standing in front of him, waiting for a promise, trusting without hesitation. And for the first time in his life, Daniel felt the crushing responsibility of what that trust meant. Olivier's hand was still wrapped around his, small and warm, and Daniel found himself gripping back instinctively. He wasn't sure what the boy expected from him, wasn't sure what he was supposed to say next. But when he looked down, Olivier just smiled, as if Daniel's presence alone was enough. That realization made something shift deep in his chest. Sarah watched the exchange carefully, her expression unreadable. He knew she was still wary, still unsure if he was capable of being in Olivier's life. He didn't blame her. He wasn't sure of it himself. But he wasn't going to fail before he even tried. Sarah straightened, her voice soft but firm. "He just woke up. He'll be hungry soon." Daniel hesitated. He wasn't sure if that was an invitation or just an observation, but he decided to take it as the first. "Can I take you both to lunch?" Sarah's lips pressed together in a way that made him think she was about to say no, but before she could, Olivier tugged at Daniel's hand. "Can we get pancakes?" Daniel glanced down, caught off guard. "Pancakes?" Olivier nodded eagerly, his blue eyes lighting up. "Mommy lets me have pancakes sometimes for lunch." Daniel smirked slightly before looking back at Sarah. "I'll take that as a yes." She sighed, clearly torn, but after a moment, she nodded. "Fine. But somewhere quiet. I don't want him overwhelmed." Daniel nodded in agreement. He wasn't ready to parade around in public with a son he had just learned about, and he could tell Sarah wanted to keep things as normal for Olivier as possible. They left the hospital together, Sarah carrying a small backpack for Olivier, and Daniel following closely behind. He still couldn't quite wrap his head around the fact that this was real. It felt strange, walking beside them, as if they were a family when they barely knew how to function as one. They found a small cafe near the hospital, tucked away on a quiet street. It was cozy, with large windows letting in soft light, and a few families scattered throughout. Sarah led Olivier to a booth, sitting beside him, while Daniel took the seat across from them. A waitress approached, giving them a friendly smile. "What can I get for you all today?" Olivier perked up immediately. "Pancakes, please." The waitress chuckled. "Good choice, kiddo. And for you too." Sarah glanced at Daniel, then back at the menu. "I'll have the same." Daniel had never ordered pancakes in his life, but something about the way Olivier grinned made him say, "Make it 3." Olivier beamed, kicking his feet under the table. Sarah shook her head with a quiet laugh. "I never thought I'd see the day Daniel Winslow willingly ordered pancakes." Daniel leaned back slightly, smirking. I guess today is full of surprises. Sarah's expression softened slightly, but there was still a distance between them, a hesitation she wasn't ready to let go of yet. He didn't blame her. Olivier started talking, completely at ease, rambling about his favorite cartoons and how he liked to build towers out of blocks. He spoke to Daniel as if they had known each other forever, as if he hadn't spent his entire life without a father. The innocence of it all hit Daniel harder than he expected. At one point, Olivier reached for the crayons the cafe had provided, pulling the small activity sheet closer. "Daddy, color with me." Daniel froze. The word hit him like a freight train. It had come so easily, so naturally, as if Olivier had always known to call him that. Daniel swallowed hard, trying to push past the sudden tightness in his chest. He glanced at Sarah, expecting her to correct him, to remind Olivier that this was new, that this man was still a stranger in some ways. But she didn't say anything. She just watched, waiting to see what Daniel would do. Daniel picked up a blue crayon, his fingers curling around it tightly as he exhaled. "All right, what are we coloring?" Olivier grinned, pushing the paper toward him. Daniel forced himself to relax, focusing on the simple lines in front of him. He wasn't good at this. He didn't know how to be a father, how to fit into a world that had already existed without him. But Olivier didn't seem to care. He just wanted Daniel there. And for the first time, Daniel realized he wanted to be there too. The cafe was warm, filled with the low hum of conversations and the occasional clatter of plates. Daniel sat across from Olivier and Sarah, watching as the boy carefully colored inside the lines of his activity sheet. It was such a simple thing, something normal, something millions of parents did with their children every day. And yet, for him, it felt monumental. He had spent his entire life chasing things he could measure: success, power, wealth. But none of it had ever made him feel the way he felt right now, sitting here with a 4-year-old boy who had called him daddy without hesitation. Sarah was quiet as she watched them. She hadn't said anything about it, hadn't corrected Olivier or tried to explain anything away. Daniel wasn't sure if that was a sign of trust or if she was waiting to see if he would run. He couldn't blame her for that. He had never been a man who stayed in one place for too long. But things were different now. The waitress returned with their food, placing 3 plates of pancakes in front of them. Olivier's eyes lit up as he grabbed his fork, stabbing into the fluffy stack with excitement. He drizzled way too much syrup over them, making a mess as he tried to cut a piece on his own. Sarah reached over to help him, steadying his plate before it could tip. Daniel watched the small interaction and felt the weight of how much he had missed. Sarah had been doing this alone for years, every meal, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. She had been both mother and father to Olivier, carrying the responsibility of raising him without any help. And now, here Daniel was, stepping into the middle of something that had existed just fine without him. Olivier chewed happily before looking up at Daniel. "You have to put butter on yours, Daddy. It makes it taste better." Daniel hesitated at the word again, but this time, it didn't hit quite as hard. He picked up the small butter packet beside his plate and opened it. "Like this?" Olivier nodded eagerly. "Yeah. And then lots of syrup." Daniel did as he was told, spreading the butter and adding more syrup than he normally would. When he took a bite, Olivier grinned. "Isn't it the best?" Daniel swallowed, nodding. "It's pretty good." Olivier beamed as if he had just won some great victory. Sarah smiled slightly, shaking her head. "He takes his pancakes very seriously." Daniel smirked. "I can see that." The conversation was easy after that. Olivier talked about everything: his favorite bedtime stories, his favorite color, how he was trying to learn how to tie his shoes but it was really hard. He spoke to Daniel as if they had always known each other, as if the past 4 years of absence had never happened. The ease with which Olivier accepted him made Daniel's chest ache. Sarah was more reserved. She spoke when needed, answered questions, but she was still guarded. Daniel could tell she was watching him carefully, making sure he didn't make promises he couldn't keep. When the meal was over, the waitress brought the check, but before Daniel could reach for it, Sarah took it first. He raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to do that." Sarah glanced at him. "I can pay for my own food, Daniel." He studied her for a moment, understanding what she meant. She wasn't going to let him walk in and suddenly start taking over. She wasn't going to make it easy for him to claim a place in their lives just because he had money. This wasn't about what he could provide financially. It was about what he was willing to be. Daniel let his hand fall back onto the table. "All right," he said simply. Sarah paid the bill, and they gathered their things to leave. Olivier reached for Daniel's hand as they walked outside, and Daniel took it without hesitation. It felt natural now. Sarah led them back toward the hospital, where she had left her car. Olivier was talking about something excitedly, but Daniel wasn't listening. His focus was on Sarah, on the tension in her shoulders, on the way she still seemed unsure of him. When they reached the parking lot, she turned to him, her expression unreadable. "This was good," she said. "But this doesn't change everything overnight." Daniel nodded. "I know." She hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know what this is supposed to look like. I don't know how to do this." Daniel met her gaze. "Then let's figure it out together." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Okay." Olivier yawned, rubbing at his eyes. Sarah opened the back door of the car, helping him climb into his car seat. He looked up at Daniel sleepily. "Are you gonna see me tomorrow?" Daniel didn't hesitate this time. "Yeah, buddy. I'll see you tomorrow." Olivier smiled, satisfied with that answer, before resting his head against the seat. Sarah glanced at Daniel once more before getting into the driver's seat. As she pulled away, Daniel stood there, watching them go, realizing that for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about work, about power, about anything that had once seemed so important. For the first time, he was thinking about what really mattered. And he wasn't going to let it slip away. Daniel arrived at the hospital the next morning earlier than expected. He wasn't sure what time Sarah would bring Olivier in, but he didn't want to take any chances. He had told his son he would see him today, and he wasn't about to break that promise. He had spent the morning ignoring emails, letting calls go to voicemail, and canceling meetings he would have never skipped before. Work had ruled his life for as long as he could remember, but for the first time, it wasn't his priority. He paced near the front entrance, glancing at his watch, feeling a strange kind of nervous energy that he wasn't used to. He had given presentations in front of thousands, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and built an empire from the ground up, yet standing here waiting for a 4-year-old boy made him feel like he was about to step into something far more terrifying than anything he had faced before. When Sarah's car finally pulled up, he exhaled, forcing himself to stay composed. She stepped out first, glancing at him briefly before opening the back door to help Olivier out of his car seat. The little boy yawned, rubbing his eyes before his gaze landed on Daniel. His tired expression instantly brightened. "Daddy!" Olivier practically launched himself out of the car, running straight toward Daniel with open arms. Daniel barely had time to react before Olivier collided into him, wrapping his small arms around his legs. The impact sent a shockwave through him, something deep and unshakable. He had spent the last 24 hours thinking about how much he had missed, about how much time he had lost. But Olivier didn't seem to care. He wasn't thinking about the years without his father. He was thinking about right now, about this moment, and that realization nearly knocked the air out of Daniel's lungs. He crouched down, resting a hand on Olivier's back. "Hey, buddy. You sleep okay?" Olivier nodded, still holding on to him. "I had a dream about dolphins." Daniel chuckled. "Yeah. What were they doing?" They were playing. And jumping really high out of the water. Olivier finally pulled back, grinning up at him. Have you ever seen a real dolphin? Daniel thought for a moment. I have. A long time ago. Olivier's eyes widened. Did they splash you? Daniel smirked. A little. Olivier giggled. If we ever see dolphins together, I bet they'll splash you a lot. Daniel swallowed hard. The way Olivier said we so easily, as if there had never been a time without him, sent an unfamiliar warmth through him. He glanced up at Sarah, who was standing beside the car, watching them with a cautious but unreadable expression. Where are you two headed? Daniel asked, standing up. Sarah hesitated. We were just going to run a few errands before I drop him off with my sister for a couple of hours. Daniel nodded, thinking. Mind if I tag along? Sarah studied him carefully, as if trying to figure out if he was serious. You want to come grocery shopping with us? Daniel shrugged. Why not? Olivier's face lit up. Yes. Daddy, can we get the dinosaur cereal? Daniel raised an eyebrow. Dinosaur cereal? Olivier nodded enthusiastically. It has marshmallows shaped like T-Rexes. Daniel smirked before looking at Sarah. Is that allowed? Sarah sighed, but there was a small smile on her lips. If you want to deal with a sugar rush later, be my guest. Daniel grinned. Sounds like a challenge. Sarah shook her head, motioning for Olivier to get back into the car. Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you. Daniel climbed into the passenger seat, feeling strangely comfortable in a situation that should have felt foreign to him. He had never done this before, never just spent a day doing normal things with family. Yet, as Sarah drove and Olivier talked excitedly from the back seat, he felt more at ease than he had in years. When they arrived at the store, Olivier immediately grabbed Daniel's hand, pulling him inside as if this were the most exciting adventure of his life. They weaved through aisles, Olivier pointing out things he wanted, Sarah trying to balance letting him have treats while still buying what they actually needed. At one point, Olivier tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Can I ride in the cart? Daniel looked at Sarah for approval. She sighed, shaking her head with a small smile. If you lift him in, he's your responsibility if he starts throwing things. Daniel smirked. Deal. He lifted Olivier into the cart, settling him into the front seat. The boy immediately grabbed the shopping list from Sarah's hands and started pretending to read it. We need cookies, and candy, and pizza, and... Sarah snatched the list back with a laugh. Nice try. Olivier giggled, leaning back as Daniel pushed the cart down the aisle. He glanced at Sarah, watching the way she effortlessly managed everything, the way she kept Olivier entertained while also making sure she got everything done. He had always known she was strong, but now he was starting to see just how much she had carried on her own. When they reached the cereal aisle, Olivier gasped dramatically. Dinosaur cereal. Daniel grabbed a box, dropping it into the cart. Olivier clapped his hands excitedly. Daddy, you're the best. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, something unfamiliar and overwhelming. He had spent years trying to be the best in business, the best in negotiations, the best in wealth. But hearing those words from his son, over something as simple as a box of cereal, meant more than any deal he had ever made. Sarah watched them carefully, her expression softer now. As they headed toward the checkout line, Daniel realized something. This was what he had been missing. This was what really mattered. And he wasn't going to let it slip away. The drive back from the store was filled with Olivier's excited chatter. He talked about the dinosaur cereal as if it were the greatest discovery of his life, swinging his legs in the car's seat while explaining, in great detail, how the marshmallows made the milk turn different colors. Daniel listened, nodding at all the right moments, while Sarah occasionally glanced at them through the rearview mirror. It still didn't feel real. The idea that he had a son, that this little boy who spoke to him so easily, who looked at him with so much trust, had been in the world for 4 years without him knowing. It was still sinking in. But the weight of it no longer felt suffocating. It felt like something else entirely. Something grounding. When they pulled up to Sarah's house, Daniel expected her to say something, to tell him this was enough for one day. But she simply unbuckled Olivier from his car seat and led the way inside, not stopping him from following. It was a small house, cozy but well kept, filled with signs of the life Sarah had built. Toys were scattered in one corner of the living room, drawings taped to the fridge. There were no traces of him here. No photos. No reminders. Olivier immediately ran to the couch, tearing open the box of dinosaur cereal. He shoved a handful into his mouth before looking up at Daniel. "Do you want some?" Daniel chuckled. "Sure." Olivier grinned and held out his tiny hand, cereal spilling onto the couch. Daniel took a few pieces, popping them into his mouth, ignoring the way Sarah rolled her eyes at both of them. After a moment, she sighed and turned to Daniel. "Do you want some coffee?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. It wasn't exactly an invitation, but it wasn't a dismissal either. "Yeah. That'd be great." She disappeared into the kitchen while Daniel sat down on the couch beside Olivier. The boy immediately scooted closer, his small body pressing against Daniel's side as he continued munching on cereal. "Mommy says I start school soon," Olivier said between bites. Daniel looked down at him. "Are you excited?" Olivier shrugged. "A little. Mommy says I'll make lots of friends." "But what if they don't like dinosaurs?" Daniel smirked. "Then they don't know what they're missing." Olivier grinned, leaning against him. Sarah returned a few minutes later, handing Daniel a cup of coffee before sitting down across from them. She watched them in silence, her fingers wrapped around her own mug. "I don't know what this is supposed to look like," she admitted after a moment. "I don't know how to just let you be in his life." Daniel nodded, setting his coffee down on the table. "I don't either. But I know I want to be here. And I know I want to be his father." Sarah exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding in those words, waiting to see if they were true. "Olivier is all I've had for the past 4 years. I made every decision with him in mind. I protected him. I didn't tell you about him, and I know that wasn't fair. But I need you to understand that I won't let anyone hurt him. Not even you." Daniel met her gaze, understanding exactly what she meant. "I won't leave." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Olivier yawned, curling up against Daniel's side, his little body warm and trusting. Sarah's expression softened as she watched them, something shifting in her eyes. Daniel wasn't sure what the future looked like, but he knew one thing for certain: he had been given a second chance. A chance to be a father, a chance to build something real. And he wasn't going to waste it. He wrapped an arm around Olivier, holding him close as the boy drifted off to sleep. For the first time in his life, Daniel Winslow wasn't thinking about business, power, or success. For the first time, he was exactly where he was meant to be. This story is about redemption, second chances, and the realization that true success isn't measured by wealth or power, but by the connections we build with the people who matter most. Daniel Winslow starts as a man who believes he has complete control over his life, only to be confronted with the shocking truth that he has a son he never knew about. At first, he reacts as any businessman would, trying to find a solution, a way to fix what was broken. But as the story unfolds, he realizes that being a father isn't something that can be negotiated or planned. It's about showing up, about being present, about choosing love over ambition. Sarah is the heart of the story in many ways. She carries the weight of her decisions, knowing that she kept Olivier a secret but also believing she did what was best at the time. Her hesitation to let Daniel in isn't just about protecting her son, it's about protecting herself from the possibility that he might walk away again. Her journey is just as important as Daniel's because she has to learn to trust that he's truly here to stay. Olivier, with his innocence and unconditional love, is the catalyst for change. He doesn't see complications, betrayals, or lost time. He only sees his father and embraces him without hesitation. That's what makes this story so powerful. It's not about fixing the past. It's about choosing to move forward, to build something new, even if it's uncertain. The ending is satisfying because it doesn't promise perfection. It doesn't tie everything up neatly in a bow. Instead, it offers something more meaningful: hope. Daniel doesn't magically become the perfect father overnight. Sarah doesn't immediately erase years of doubt. But they take a step towards something real, something worth fighting for. And in the end, that's what truly matters.